Well, welcome everyone to today's Magnet Culture Workforce webinar. We're going to be focusing on building workplace self awareness, the value of improving leaders' emotional intelligence. And I'm Jess Ray with Magnet, and I'll be joined by Alayna Thomas, workforce and Gen Z strategist here at Magnet Culture. And I know we said it last webinar, but I just want to celebrate one more time, milking it for all it's worth, that Alayna was recently named 2024 keynote speaker to follow by USA Today. So, congratulations. I'm so excited for you and for our whole team and for our clients as well. But moving on for today, in our discussion on self awareness in the workplace, we're talking all about emotional intelligence, which is very different from the IQ, right? We're talking about EQ. And according to TTI, that is the ability to sense, understand, and effectively apply emotions to be more collaborative and productive with others. Wouldn't we all like to have that? So, in today's webinar, we're going to dive into some pieces with EQ. First, how greater self awareness and emotional intelligence can help you stay calm, make better decisions, and create a more collaborative workplace, and how emotional awareness and regulation impacts you as a leader. Remember that all of our webinars are recorded. So if you think, hey, I may know some leaders who couldn't be on today, you can grab that from our website. We'll drop that into the chat. And you can also check out this year's past webinars, and certainly don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can be notified when those are available. Today's webinar playback will probably be available within just a few days at that same page if you wanted to share that, and we'll send out a post webinar email as well. If you have any questions that come to mind, there is a Q&A box right below, and you can find that button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Be sure, of course, to stay on for the entire session. We do have an offer at the end that if EQ is really, really grabbing at your heartstrings, if you will, you can take advantage of our offer today. But before we dive in, I'll tell you a little bit more about my speaking partner today. So, Alayna is wise beyond her years, Gen Z professional who's just consistently blowing the minds of our clients, of course. And I think what's really cool about just the evolution of magnet culture is it's really important for us to understand today's new workforce, which Gen Z is that. So we're just honored to have her a part of our team. Alayna's already earned her master's in management, HR professional designation from SHRM, and she teaches at UT Dallas when she's not on the road speaking and training with our magnet culture clients on how to reduce turnover. Alayna and I have been working hard this year to extend our award-winning generational programs, like I mentioned, to include Gen Z. And our association partners right now are grabbing that keynote and saying we've got to have more information for our members. And so it's really one that's hot off the press and really excited to roll out for next year. So we're going to jump right into the topic of EQ. I'm a millennial, so I ask why to everything. So as a lot of us do. But Alayna, can we start with why does emotional intelligence even matter? Why is it a thing?
I mean, I would talk about this all day, every day if I could. I definitely am a heart first leader. I always have been. And as a heart first leader, I I really remember a lot of the emotions that I have. And I don't think I'm unique in that. I think all of us have moments that I'm going to tell stories today and you're going to say, "Oh, yeah, I've been there. I remember that." Y'all, I still remember like it was yesterday when a leader of mine yelled at me in the hallway at work about a typo that I made on a document that went out to employees. It was not about the typo. I knew that instantly, but my body didn't know that. My brain knew that, but my body said, "Why am I being yelled at in the hallway?" It impacted the rest of my day and, quite honestly, the rest of my relationship with that leader. I also still remember when another leader of mine cheerfully came into the room of our team meeting and said, "Okay, everyone, we've got another initiative that we are going to tackle as an HR team." We had too many initiatives. She did not read the room and realize that we were stressed and exhausted, and fear was not the emotion that we needed that message with. I mean, imagine a time that you are thinking that you felt this. Um, it felt awful, right? It felt bad. Even when it was a cheery message, when that wasn't the message that you needed, it didn't feel right. And it's human nature. I mean, I wanna start with that. It is human nature that I have been that leader before. I don't s I've never yelled at an employee, but I have definitely misread the room, or I have put my emotion on the forefront of a decision that I made and not what benefited the team. So even though it's human nature, that doesn't give us the excuse not to do something about it. And having been on the receiving end, and leaders, your staff being on the receiving end, it's not right. It's not right to create the culture that we need and to really value our employees. We have to exert so much more energy around leaders and peers that just don't know how to manage their emotions, right? It's like sometimes it feels like trying to lead up is like leading a toddler at times. But I'm not saying that to say that this is a skill that we just have inherently and you just can't get better. It might feel like that. You know, some leaders where you're like, well, I can't even with them. They're never going to grow in that area or whatever. No, if you have heard Magnet, if you've heard me talk, one of the things I talk about a lot is moving from judgment to understanding. And so I really hope that our conversation today can help us move from judgment, even of ourselves, but also those around us to better understand. And the big thing here is that there is a tool that can help you, and you deserve the tools and you deserve the knowledge that can help you be a better leader. And if you're not a direct leader of people, that can help you to just feel better about the work that you do. I mean, wouldn't it be nice to leave a meeting and to say, you know, I don't fully agree with us having one more initiative on our plate, but I do feel like my leader understands me and they understand how I'm feeling. And so I trust them and I'm going to give this a shot. Just that simple change can impact us and the work that we do.
Yeah, 100%, like 100%. And you know what's really interesting is the conversations I have with clients. The one thing that is like a constant is the lack of time.
Mm,
So if we don't have time, sometimes we are more apt to be more emotional or not be able to regulate those properly. But if we had the tool, we would allow ourselves more time so we don't have to go back again and put out those dumpster fires, if you will. So with you 100%, Alayna. And last webinar, we talked a lot about DISC assessment and that particular tool. That is a tool that can actually be something that can benefit all employees, top down, sideways, etc. So why is the EQ self-assessment more important for those, or most important for those at a leadership level?
I mean, you said it just a second ago, time. So, and I'm going to add on there money. We don't have unlimited resources to
Mhm.
train everyone in the entire team. And so I just want to tell you the biggest bang for your buck is going to be to tackle this at a leadership level rather than an all team level because it trickles down. If you have someone who can model, might even use the phrase like better emotional maturity in a meeting, might be a phrase I've heard some people use with EQ. If they can demonstrate that, then other people on the team see that as an example. So I'm actually going to share just a couple slides because people really loved the slides last time. And also, I love the slides too. So don't get me wrong. Let me switch over. Jess, just checking. You can see it full screen.
I can. Looks great.
Okay, sweet. So one thing that sets EQ apart from DISC, besides the fact that it's a really good bang for your buck with your leaders, is that it actually can change significantly over time. And the folks over at Talent Smart, I wish I was best friends with them. They've done some research on this. And they have figured out that when someone moves from independent contributor to supervisor to manager, their EQ is increasing. Their understanding of the emotions around them and how their actions influence those emotions is increasing. Then there's a scary thing that happens. And as they move to director, VP, senior executive, and even CEO, data shows that EQ decreases. Why is this? When I first heard this, I was like, what? I can't believe that, because I want to believe that our senior leaders are competent in what they do, but y'all, they get more responsibilities and they get further and further removed from the front line and from the employee. And their performance is based on results. And a lot of times we are going to put results over people. So I don't want to say that they're intentionally doing this, but it's what's happening because of this disconnect. So I want to encourage them and you to not become disconnected over time. And one way that you can get reconnected without spending all the time with all the people and visiting every single person is to have the tool to better understand you first and foremost. How are you showing up? And then you can help this when you discover these things about yourself, you can use that to influence how you lead. I might even add one more thing here, which is that EQ is personal. This is because it's a skill that can increase or decrease over time. It can feel like it's your fault if your score is lower. And we're going to talk about that in just a little bit. Me and Jess had some initial impressions of our first results, and they weren't all great, but it has helped us grow as well. So the EQ assessments, TTI Success Insights, just like DISC, we use them for EQ. This is really great for helping identify some of these, say, gaps or maybe just areas of improvement, and then it actually gives you ways to improve that. So instead of this being personal, like me telling Jess, which I promise I'll explain this word in a minute, but me telling Jess, you got pretty low self-awareness. Ouch. No, that feels so personal. But if we can have a test help us have that conversation, I can say, hey, Jess, looking at your assessment, what were your initial thoughts? One thing that came up on here is that your self awareness score is a little bit lower than average. What do you feel about that? What do you think? And then we can help. And it didn't feel like Alayna just came and told Jess something personal. So let me show you a couple of my favorite pages of the report. The first is very similar to the DISC behavioral characteristics page. It's actually a couple pages here that really summarize you as a person, both from an emotional lens, but the key here is how your emotions impact your action and your decision making. So that's what you're going to read here. And then the next page, that there's one of these for each dimension, which I'm about to talk about, is a page that tells you both your score and a bunch of ways to improve that. This is a 14-page report, and I actually counted this morning to make sure I got this right. There are 55 total recommendations across this report for ways to increase your score. Yeah. So it's really great. And we know that one size doesn't fit all. So it's not going to be helpful to tell everyone, okay, everyone across the board to increase this score, you have to do blank. You have to write out your goals and post them on your computer screen. Oh my gosh, I just lost like 3 of you. You're like, I am not doing that. Don't worry. There are lots of other recommendations too. So let me get to the whole what is EQ. I know I just talked about a lot of other things. I want to show you this visual, and then I am going to stop sharing my screen here. So if you're a visual person, take a screenshot. But we've got 5 dimensions of EQ. The report that you get really shows you your score in these 5 areas in the form of this circular graph. But I want to point out that there is a self and others component. Self and others are really key to EQ. Self is all about your awareness and regulation, your ability to both know and control how your emotions impact your decisions. And then next level leaders are also able to read the room and show social awareness as well as social regulation and help influence the emotions of others. Motivation also falls right in the middle. It's actually wrapping around the whole graph, and that is tied to self, but can be heavily influenced by the way that you interact with others around you. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen there. Any questions so far, Jess, from anyone, or want me to dive into each dimension a little bit more?
Yeah, I think that could be really helpful. And I also think what's really interesting is and really helpful within that EQ report is it helps define what that means because I might think motivation means me getting out of bed in the morning to grab my cup of coffee. And
Yeah.
that's exactly what that particular dimension means. So, Elena, can you just give us maybe just a little more flavor of a couple of those there? And then I am curious to know, as Elena goes through there, how many of you on today's webinar have taken an EQ assessment? So, if you have, you can just type yes in the chat. I'm just really curious to know if that's something that you have taken, or if you haven't, shoot us a no. I'm just kind of curious to see how many people are familiar with this. For me in particular, we started offering the EQ assessment tool to our clients. And of course, we've got our Leadership Essentials class that pairs with that about 2 years ago. And the reason was we saw that, like Elaine had mentioned, that there was this growing disconnect. Our clients would call us and say, I just they don't our leaders don't understand our front line or we're having a lot of like my workload is this and we're throwing a bunch of initiatives at that like Elena had mentioned. And so we were like, hey, EQ is what these leaders need to be able to say, how can I lessen the gap, I suppose, of that disconnect. So thanks so much for the responses in the chat. Looks like maybe more no's than yeses overall. But we're running pretty close to 50-50, Elena. Well, maybe 60-40 on the no side. But
Okay.
if you don't mind, just so because we do have a lot of folks who haven't taken the assessment, can you take us through um, some of the dimensions of EQ to help us better understand?
Yeah. I like to start with self. So the self and others piece, let's start with self, which is self-awareness. Self-awareness is probably your first inclination, does match the definition for this one. It's knowing your emotions and how they impact your decisions and behavior. This whole series that we're doing is on self-awareness because it's a building block to the rest. So if your test shows back that you have lower self-awareness, I always recommend to leaders that's the place to start, because having that can really help you in other ways. I was asking some leaders recently. I actually was teaching a disc class, and I was asking them about EQ. And I said, how do you work on your self-awareness and like talk about emotion in the workplace? Is that too fluffy? Some people will say like emotion's too fluffy. Like, how do you make it a business thing? And they said, oh my gosh, it is a business thing because how we show up to work is going to influence all of our interactions the rest of the day. One leader told me that she didn't agree with it at first, but her HR team rolled out a sunny, cloudy activity on their team. So when they came to their physical desks, they had a sun and a cloud magnet, and they had to put up next to they all had like a little magnetic whiteboard. They all had to put up if they were a cloud or a sun that day. Y'all, at first she was like, I'm not gonna do this. And then she started doing it. And this is like very high D, to use that language from DISC, very high D person who wants to get down to business. She said that this completely changed how she approached every leader that day. Because if that leader has a cloud, okay, we're not gonna come in with our chipper attitude. No, we're gonna gauge where they're at. So some groups have used sunny, cloudy type language. Others have done a one-word check-in at the beginning of meetings. I've done that a lot. How are you feeling? Some people take their emotional temperature, so they actually put a metric to it. So instead of a one-word feeling at the beginning of a meeting, where are you on a scale of 1 to 10? 1 being this, 10 being this, where are you at today? Right? Once we know that about people, we know how to better interact with them. So that's self-awareness. If any of you have best practices for ways that you do kind of measure your team's self-awareness and help increase that, I'd love to see those in the chat too. It's a great brainstorming idea. So that's understanding how you are feeling and how that impacts your behaviors. The next one, self-regulation. So this is the next step in the building block. Self-regulation is not taking emotions out of decision making. It is understanding how emotions impact decision making and adjusting them appropriately. So I pretty much already said this. If you know that you're cloudy today, or you know that you are coming into the workplace already exhausted because you didn't get a lot of sleep last night because your kiddo was sick, right? How can you say, can you change that emotion? Or are you going to have to work with that all day long? Sometimes it is changeable, sometimes it isn't. The key here, I like to tell leaders, is to pause and assess. So it's that practice of saying, wait, before I jump into that next thing, what are all of the things going on in my mind right now? And how is that going to influence how I show up? It's almost addressing the elephant that you're bringing into the room rather than the elephant that's already there. So if I am having a heightened stress day, I need to take a step away and calm my nervous system before I go have an important conversation with an employee from an HR perspective. And if
I have
I
a
am having,
question on that.
yes, yes,
Is that one that would be like you show up to work, you got pulled over that morning, right? Because you were going too fast because you woke up late or things were,
mhm,
distracting at home. And you come in and you're just like, you're stuck in that before work mindset.
yes,
So then you're making these quick decisions that maybe are a more negative connotation.
yeah,
Is that an example of something like that?
yes. That is such a good example of someone who's demonstrating low self-regulation that day. Someone with high self-regulation, exact same thing happens, which sucks, right? We don't want that to happen, but you woke up late, you got pulled over, you got in, and maybe while you were drinking your morning water or coffee, you said, "Mm, okay, I gotta leave that at the door. Maybe I actually need to tell someone about it so that it doesn't come up 15 more times today, but I'm gonna leave that at the door and I'm gonna go on with my day and I'll handle that later." Someone,
Right.
let me give a more, so someone might be like, I would never do that, right? Like, I would never burden my coworkers with my speeding ticket. Okay, great. You are a saint. Love you. Keep doing what you're doing. What if you that morning or the night before got like the best news ever? Your kid got into college. Oh my gosh, your kid got into college. You're so proud. And you want to come in and tell everyone that day. Really heightened emotions, whether positive or negative, can influence our decision making positively or negatively. So, that same awesome, best emotion ever, you got to go into the workplace and still pause and say, how is that going to keep me from meeting my team where they're at today? Because if your
Mm.
team is exhausted or stressed or overworked, and you come in and you tell this next initiative and you're so excited, you lose the ability to read the room. Reading the room is social awareness. That is the it really is, and some of us are so much better at this than others. It's the ability to walk in and to understand what people are feeling, what their faces, the look on their faces mean. Um, it's it's knowing that certain body language is indicating an openness or a closeness to the conversation. I actually want to mention a little bit of some of the Gen Z influence that we're seeing here with the social awareness piece. So, a lot of leaders right now are struggling to adapt to this rise of mental health conversations in the workplace. And I hear you because you've not been fully equipped to have that conversation. And, leader, you don't really have the luxury to not have that conversation. Because that's what your employee, if they're bringing this conversation to you, they're bringing their whole self. That's what they're needing in that moment. And you have to guide and support them through that in order to meet the needs of the business. So we actually
Mhm.
are building a class right now for 2025 to really address that piece of this puzzle, because social awareness is great, but if we're not actually able to do anything about it, then we don't have the social regulation piece. So we can be aware of what's going on, but if we don't know how to influence that, then
Mhm.
we're stuck for the day. So social regulation is almost like that final piece. And I can go back to motivation too, but social regulations, that final piece where you have like the best leader ever is able to hear what you're saying, hear all your emotions, and then to ask you questions and be like a coach. And they're able to coach you with care through your big emotion, positive or negative, and how that's impacting you and help you to figure out how to focus in a different way. Um, any questions so far on any of that? I gotta grab one thing really quick.
Oh, no, go ahead. It's interesting. It reminds me also of it's lovely how these things weave together, but you had written um a blog on LinkedIn.
Yes.
How
Yes.
to lead with an empty cup, how to care about your people when you're struggling too. I'm going to put that in the chat because I think all of this all ties in together. And I'm with you. I think leaders in particular, we don't we aren't afforded the luxury, like you mentioned, Elena, to go like on a constant listening tour and checking in with every single person and making that connection again. We have some leaders who have hundreds of direct reports under them. And so, but what I think is really great about EQ is leaders can be in this EQ training, and it's like this you see all these light bulbs going off, like, oh my gosh, what a great way for me to improve moving forward. Um, so I think that's all is also very relevant to the lack of time that we have in today's world. And then I do have a question that has come in from Mackenzie. Thanks so
Mm,
much, Mackenzie, for sending us a question, and she's asking if you're in a management position or this isn't a priority of your management team, how can
mhm,
you help encourage conversation around
mm,
this, like, with your team? Like,
mm.
how can you have this conversation with your team?
I think that, we said this with DISC, it can be hard to foster these conversations organically, so I do think that something like this, like having EQ language, is really helpful because it's tried and true, and there's some scientific backing to it. Mackenzie, we're going to share a resource at the end that you can walk away, and it is about 10 ways to improve emotional intelligence. So we'll share that at the end. I think that'll help start some of the conversation. But let me give a personal example. So think back, I mentioned that leader that gave us that extra initiative that as a team we were not ready to handle. So we had two choices as a team, I really feel like. One is to shut up and to not say anything. So heads down, kind of approach. And the other is to lead up. So kind of shut up or lead up is what I like to think. And I was the most junior member on the team. Okay. The most junior member. But I also am Gen Z. And so I'm not afraid to say what I'm thinking sometimes and probably could have done it with more tact, but that was many years ago. So I think I've gotten better. And during my next one on one with that leader, I decided to share how I felt after that meeting. And I was able to share that I am feeling a bit overwhelmed and I don't understand why we have to do this. And so I am going to be a great employee. I mean, I probably said these exact words because I was such like teacher's pet, like wanted to be the best. But I was like, I'm gonna whatever you ask me to do, I'm gonna do. But I just really I've been thinking about this for days and I really wanted to let you know how I was feeling. So I was able to share how I was feeling and lead up. Now, that is a great example of an employee bringing their whole self to work because for the longest time, talking about emotion in the workplace has been deemed as unprofessional. But I mean, I grew up with a different lesson on that, and I have to disagree. I think that we see that the disconnect that happens over time. Okay, so it might be mirroring. So maybe this way is the way that the graph. works. But the disconnect over time is happening because we're not in touch with the impact that our decisions are having on staff. And so that's like 15 answers. 15 is my go-to number today. That was a lot of answers to your question, Mackenzie, but please let me know if I answered that fully. Jess, what am I missing? Is there anything that I'm missing there?
No, I think you're spot on. I think it makes a lot of sense. And that kind of it reminds me of like when I got my EQ report back,
Mhm.
I was really jarred. I was really like, I didn't realize, and particularly in what I do for Magnet Culture, that I had some areas of some pretty significant improvement. And I think that's what's really important is when you do choose a assessment type of tool that you have training that's paired with it instead of just going online and saying free EQ reports. So we want to make sure that it's paired with proper training because as a team, we had done it internally and we had one of our trainers come in and give us like a lengthy class on it because I needed to understand what everything meant. And the cool thing is, I also understood that I could increase my score. So unlike DISC, which will stay pretty much the same unless you have a big event that really changes some wiring. But EQ can change. So we have clients who purchase their EQ assessments through Magnet Culture, pair it with the training, and then a year or two later with those same group of leaders, they'll have them take it again and we will redo that class as like a refresher round two. Let's take a look at see where you grew, maybe where you didn't grow, or your name number changed either way. So I'm curious to know, Elena, if you don't mind sharing what's your personal experience been with the assessment?
Yeah. So I said at the beginning that I could talk about like emotional leadership like in a positive way all day long, right? The impact that empathy and curiosity can have on our effectiveness as human beings is like my favorite topic. So I thought I'm going to take this EQ assessment and the highest score you can get is 100 in each area. I thought that I was going to be in the 90th percentile. Okay, little straight A's on EQ. There were a couple areas that I scored below 60. So that is a failing grade. For those of you who aren't in the academic space like I teach. So I'm like, that's a failing grade. I immediately felt in those two areas that I had below a 60 that I was failing. I mean, that was my first impression. So I want to say that one thing with the EQ assessments, most people don't share them the same way that they share with DISC. Some companies will say that, you put what your DISC letters are, your primary and secondary. Like I'm a high I and a low D. You put that like on your cubicle or on your email signature. EQ is not quite the same because we know that it's truly I pointing out areas that we can grow. And we don't usually like to put those on display. So I want to circle back to that one last dimension that I didn't talk about, which is motivation. Motivation is not what you initially think it is. It is the internal drive to pursue goals and improve. So I would say that I have high motivation. Without having taken this test, I would have said I'm a really motivated individual. But the test showed that I actually have some ways to grow in that motivation. And I think the key is that I'm a motivated individual when I know why we are doing something. And that makes me very similar to many of my Gen Z peers who care heavily about the why and the personal connection. We're not just going to show up and do the job because you said so. I'm so sorry. I know that's so frustrating, but we have to understand why. That's so key. So, one of the pieces of advice for how to improve motivation is to figure out what your goals are and try to understand how what you're doing in your role helps move towards those goals. So that is something that I have started to do, and I would be excited to take the test again in the next 6 months and see if that score improves.
Yeah.
But I guess the key of self-awareness is you don't know what you're not self-aware of, right? Like that's the whole thing. If you don't know, how are you going to find out This is one tool that can help you with those blind spots. Another tool is asking other people. That can be uncomfortable to ask your peer or your boss, hey, what are my blind spots when it comes to my ability to socially regulate? Okay, first of all, we might not know what that means. And also, it's just a little bit unorganic to do. So, this really helps you out. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm with you. Any other thoughts before we wrap up, Elena? Anything else that you feel like the folks who are listening in
Mm.
who maybe, have not experienced EQ, any other thoughts that you feel like they should know?
I want to say that you might have had that interaction this morning. Like we're at, I'm in Central Time, so we're at like 11:37 Central, and you might have already had a moment today, or you have a whole day ahead of you, and you might have a moment later where you don't show up exactly the way that you wanted to. That you have an area of growth that you don't have time to change right now. And I just want to say that's okay. And change takes time. I heard someone use the phrase 2 days ago, practice makes better. And I really like that. Practice doesn't make perfect, it makes better. And that's the goal here. The big goal is to not become disconnected from the impact that we are having on other people. And so moving from judgment to understanding is really important to me. So when that first reaction to a person, when it is coming from a place of judgment, being able to step back and say, maybe there's more to it. Maybe something happened this morning that I don't know about, right? This helps us move to understanding. The second piece is that this helps us to be more curious and to coach with care, both up and down in our organizations. And then finally, if you do all that, it trickles down. I mean, it really influences everyone. I think we all deserve to go to work and to feel fulfilled and satisfied and like we impacted the people that we are serving. I think that it shouldn't just be about business needs versus my needs. I really think that there is a working world that blends both of those together and really helps bridge some of these gaps that we're feeling. So I just want to encourage everyone today that practice makes better.
Absolutely. I agree. And it shows you right here that because everything we do is of course to improve culture
Mm,
and improve retention. And better bosses keep staff around longer.
mm.
And so our whole goal at the end of the day is to reduce that turnover, to make a better culture, to make that dinner time conversation that people have with their families like, you will not believe what my boss did today. Or they could say, you will not believe what my boss did today, right? Like, we want to be that good
Yes.
conversation that they have with their families and their friends. And so I hope that as we wrap up today's call, certainly first of all, if you have any questions, please put those in the Q&A, because our whole purpose of making this as a focal point in our webinar is that this is just another really wonderful tool that you can use as a leader, or if you help put together leadership development training for folks in a leadership position. This is really powerful. And getting that group together, our in person class is 3 hours long. Can you imagine all of your leaders getting in a room for 3 hours talking about emotional and social regulation and
Yeah.
motivation? Like,
Yeah.
amazing results that come out of something like that. So, as you all put any questions in the chat, just as a wrap up here, did want to mention we're going to send everyone on the call off with something in your hands. So if you go to magnetvault.com and you download the 10 ways to increase emotional intelligence ebook from TTI Success Insights, that is going to give you just this really nice layout of, hey, how can I, even without the assessment, how can I be more aware of how I can increase my emotional intelligence? And it elaborates on what we discussed today and gives some immediately actionable steps until we get the opportunity to train your leaders, right? So I'll drop that magnetvault.com into the chat here in a moment. The other piece is make sure you register for our next webinar on December the 6th at noon. Alayna and Kara Soletto, who's Magnet Culture's president and founder, are going to offer a state of the workforce address, helping leaders embrace the new approach and best lead today's new workforce. This would be a really great one to grab some staff members and kind of sit down, maybe even as like a watch party, if you will. And then you can even have your own little debrief after that particular webinar.